What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly podcast where we talk everything Iowa State. We'll start by recapping the Oklahoma State win first in the Big 12 and go into Oklahoma, the upcoming game. So I guess starting with Oklahoma State, what did we see? It was pretty good offensive showing. Defense may have slipped a little bit, but I guess what were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, really, I was really surprised both offensively and defensively. I think the big thing that we kind of talked about during and after the game was that the defense kind of gave up some big plays, and that was probably the worst outing defensively, but the best outing for the offense, especially in the passing game. And, the run game got going as well when Eli Sanders came in and kind of took over that starting role.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was the big plays on defense were kind of uncharacteristic. We weren't really expecting some of those big breakout, runs or the big passes. But I think the defense did a good job of locking down whenever they developed and, preventing, sure scores from those. And, of course, there were scores after it. But, just being able to come back on a play and not just give it up is, good to see going forward.
Yeah, and that's something that you're going to see, or we've already seen a lot from this Iowa State defense, is that they are very good in the red zone. They're not a team that, when you see maybe in Ohio, we saw this against Ohio, we've seen this against every team that they played so far, is that when they get in the red zone, it's not a for sure 7 points. They might get 3 off of you, but again, just embracing that like bend but don't break mentality. And like I said, that's just something that we talked about a lot, which was the defense. I believe they gave up 400 total yards of offense to Oklahoma State, and that's just something we had not seen from them so far this year. They've given up barely over 200 in their other matchups. So It was just I was very surprised to see that, but kind of you're going to have games like that as a defense, and especially one of the best in the Big 12.
Yeah, for sure. And they definitely pushed that bend don't break to the limit. It was, they kind of bent quite a bit, broke a few times, but at the end of the day, they got the win, and that's really all you can ask for. And, going back to the offense, I think, they did a great job this week of doing what I think they can do. And, they put a lot more faith in Rocco's arm as opposed to, trying to pound away at the ground when it's not working. And, late in the game when, they needed to switch stuff up, Eli Sanders came in and did a great job of just, changing pace and, moving the ball.
Yeah, I mean, when your first rushing touchdown from a running back comes in the 4th game of the season, that's just, I had to really remind myself, like all the rushing touchdowns have been scored by Rocco so far, and but it was good, of course, to see Eli come in. He had been dealing with some injuries, and of course, the reason he came in was because Cartavius went down. Which at the press conference today, we got the sign from Matt Campbell that Cartavius has been practicing, so I'm assuming that he'll take over that starting role again. But like you said, Sanders just coming in and dominating, finishing with 15 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, and Campbell said that the injury wasn't anything serious. I think maybe he just was slow to get up. His arm maybe got bent a little weird, but him practicing is a good sign going forward, just that he should be good.
And at that point in the game, it was clear that this is going to be another game that, the offensive line was not going to be able to run block, or maybe the running backs weren't going to be able to make as many plays as they had in the previous games. So that's when they started to focus on Rocco, and really his connection between him and Jalen Knoll really just blossomed, and is definitely their best game so far as, that wide receiver quarterback duo.
Oh, yeah. It was good to have Jalen Knoll back. He definitely, his absence was felt against Ohio. Daniel Jackson did a great job against Ohio. Higgins was good too. It was just, there was this missing piece, and we definitely saw that missing piece show up against Oklahoma State. He had 146 yards in the air, most of those in the first half, and had a touchdown alongside that. That's really, you can't really ask for a better game from a receiver.
And Rocco said after the game that he felt like Jalen was he was frustrated with himself during and after the Ohio game, because he really wanted to be out there, and of course with the result as well, just being how they lost, and really how they lost, they couldn't really get anything going on offense. And Jalen just said it was great to be back out there, and being able to produce like that. And you talk about Daniel Jackson again. I mean, Iowa State was close to having another receiver go over 100 yards. He finished with, I want to say it was 5 catches for 90 yards. So just to see that could be the new wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 duo. But also you mentioned guys like Jaden Higgins, who didn't really see a lot of action. And then also Dimitri Stanley, who I personally have been waiting to have a few big games or a few big plays in these games. And I think we might see that as Big 12 play continues.
Yeah, they definitely have a talented receiver room. The biggest story I felt was Daniel Jackson. 2 touchdowns after being like just non-existent for his entire career. I mean, he's dealt with injury after injury. You know, his story, if you listen to it, it's very inspiring. He definitely could have quit a long time ago. You know, he dealt with his near-death experience in high school, pretty much almost taking him out of football entirely. And then going into Iowa State, where his first couple years were just, you know, him battling different sorts of injuries the entire time he was here. And then finally seeing the field and the last 2 games just, you know, exploding, just coming out of nowhere. I mean, it really shows that he's persevered and, you know, he could actually be one of the leading guys in this room going forward.
Yeah, and that's something that you see a lot from Iowa State, just the resilience of guys that you know, they don't start their first couple of years or they deal with some injuries. That's just, personally for me, it's awesome to see a story hear a story like that and see him perform like that, whether you're a fan of Iowa State or not. And yeah, it was just really great to see him have another great game after that Ohio game. And yeah, I'm really confident moving forward. This game against Oklahoma State made me confident in the receiver room moving forward, knowing that, you know, Jalen Knoll obviously was stepping into that wide receiver 1 role as a captain in his junior year. And then also just knowing that you have 3 capable guys in Jaden Higgins, Dimitri Stanley, and Daniel Jackson that could sub in for that wide receiver 2 role and just be very capable of helping out Rocco, who by far had his best game as a Cyclone.
Oh, yeah. He almost threw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns with no picks, you know, keeping above a 70% completion rating. That was as perfect as you could get, especially for Rocco. He's been, you know, we've talked a lot about the run game, but having that much trust and, you know, amount of, you know, passing attempts, it just showed that they can move the ball in the air. And I think going forward, they're definitely going to play call better around Rocco as opposed to, you know, just trying to push the ball whenever they can up the field.
Yeah, and I think this really showed a lot of the trust that they have in him. Let's see. Yeah, he threw the ball 38 times, completed 27 of his passes. So that just shows that moving forward, if the run game does not work, which I would not be surprised if it continues to not work, but it's that this young quarterback is very capable of stepping into this new starting role that, you know, it didn't really seem like, I wouldn't say that it didn't seem like he was able to or that he was capable of doing it, but just the progression that he showed in this game, moving from the Ohio game where, you know, obviously you look at you take the illness into account, but really just thinking about how, you know, this is a kid that his first Big 12 game as a starter, and he really just comes in and just shuts the lights out and Jack Trice.
Oh, yeah. And especially going forward, he played like one of the top Big 12 quarterbacks should play. So if, you know, the Cyclones want to be at the top of the Big 12 or at least compete for a bowl game, he has to keep playing like this. So I think you see him have a game like this. It shows that, yes, he can throw the ball. He can move the ball down the field. I think Shieldhouse and Campbell are going to be looking at that like, okay, maybe we should throw the ball more. You know, obviously still try to get some yards on the rush game, but, you know, this team is going to win through the air, and that's what he showed against Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up, you know, being a quarterback in the Big 12 because I think especially, you know, since I've been paying attention to Iowa State for the past couple of years and the Big 12 in general, obviously, a Big 12 team is not going to excel if you don't have that guy at quarterback. You know, you look at teams like, you know, we'll talk about Oklahoma, Texas, you know, every now and then you'll have, Oklahoma State last year had their quarterback in Sanders and
TCU last year.
Yep, TCU. you find that the best teams in the Big 12 excel because they have a great quarterback. And I think that's what a lot of people's concerns were heading into Big 12 plays, because we had not seen a game like this from Rocco. And just knowing that he was able to do this. And obviously, you know, Oklahoma State, I wouldn't say has the best secondary, probably not even, they might even have like one of the top 5 worst in the Big 12. But just still, you see that poise and that consistency from Rocco in Big 12 play. Any Iowa State fan should be confident moving forward with him.
Oh, yeah. And I think the big thing was he was good in his first 3 games. He wasn't, like, great. I think what we were missing was that star power that, you know, he can go out and throw 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. We hadn't seen that yet. And against Oklahoma State, he showed that he can definitely be a star when he needs to be. So that's very promising going forward.
Yeah. And again, the pass blocking was great. I want to say Rocco was not sacked in this game against the Sooners.
No sacks.
So again, just the pass blocking is there. The quarterback is there. And yeah, we talked about it last week, whether we were going to be sitting here thinking that it was going to be a switch going into the Oklahoma game or not. You know, all about the what ifs and, you know, if the passing game still isn't working. But I think really that, you know, they have obviously found their answer. And again, just Rocco Beck's capable of being just the next great Iowa State quarterback because of this game.
Oh, yeah. And I think we go back a little bit to the offensive line. It wasn't the best performance on the run. You know, we've seen this happen the last 3 games, now last 4 games. The running game, I don't know what the deal is with, you know, why they can't move the ball on the ground or why they can't create holes or define the holes. But I think the pass block is like really promising going forward if we want to put the ball into Rocco's hands more. It shows that he can actually be safe in the pocket. He'll have time to throw the ball and move the ball in the air. You know, if this team wants to win through the air, then that pass block is definitely a really promising sign.
And I think it became pretty clear that, you know, the running backs are not the issue because, you know, obviously Norton really didn't get a lot of attempts in this game, only, you know, 2 carries before he got hurt. But then, you know, Eli Sanders stepping in, showing that, you know, the running backs are capable of making the plays. It's just all about finding the holes. And I think we saw that a couple times against the Cowboys, is that if the holes are made, any running back that's in there is going to be able to make a play. It just depends on having your offensive line, you know, fix their issues of whether it's not being able to set up the blocks or just not executing the play well enough. So I think really that's just the issue that they need to fix is I think the guys are there on the roster, both in the running back room and the offensive line to make those plays happen. It's just about executing them at 100%.
Yeah, and I think you talk about the guys in the room. I feel like the team knows that this is an issue, and they've been asked about it, you know, the last 3 weeks at this point, and they're trying to figure it out. They've been rotating quite a few people in and out. We saw Brendan Black come in against Oklahoma State, and he had a really good game, honestly. I think they just need to find the pieces, you know, who works really well in certain spots, and obviously they're still working on that, but I think Oklahoma State was a good start where, again, the pass block was great, but there were some really good signs in the run game late when I believe they were just trying to attempt to figure out what was working and what wasn't.
Right.
And you talk about Brendan Black. I want to highlight him a little bit because he was highlighted in the press conference. Dude is strong. He was, I guess, in high school, he was 400-pound bencher, 600-pound squatter. Like, you talk about violence and aggression on the offensive line. That's the guy that's going to be the upcoming star, is the guy who can shove the 400-pound lineman with ease.
Right. And
defensive lineman, I should say.
Yeah. And, you know, you're going to see that a lot in Big 12 play, is that they focus a lot on, any team in the Big 12 focuses a lot on having that defensive line that can stop the run game, because there's a lot of talented running backs, especially at the top of the Big 12. So I think any offensive lineman, especially a young guy that you can have that comes in there and, like you said, just bowls over 300-pound defensive linemen, that's going to be awesome. And just to see that Matt Campbell has the confidence to put, you know, young guys in there that haven't exactly started a game or just make mid-game adjustments. Personally, from, you know, when you're looking at Iowa State, you're just going to want to see that, know that they're able to, or they are capable and wanting to make adjustments mid-game and when something's not working.
Yeah, and you talked about that after the game was adjustments, and great teams are, I guess, willing to admit when they're wrong or make the necessary adjustments to win games. And they've definitely done that. You know, they could have just rolled over from the Ohio game and said, oh, you know, we lost against Ohio. We're not going to beat Oklahoma State. You know, this is just going to be another bad game and just roll through Big 12 doing what they usually do. But being able to adjust from a loss like that and then, you know, put up 34 points against your first Big 12 opponents is definitely promising. It shows that they are willing to, you know, do what they need to win.
Yeah, and I think really the outlier, you really look at the Ohio game as an outlier because every game at Jack Trice has looked like the team has a will to win, or that they want to go out there. They want to not only perform in front of the home crowd, but they want to get that win. And I think being able to turn around and do that against Oklahoma State at home, you're looking at the big thing for me is I always look at them in warm-ups when a big play happens, like when J.R. Singleton got his first sack. You saw that the defense was crowd around him, you know, just patting him on the back, whatnot. They just looked fired up, and I personally am wondering if that does carry over into Norman because I know that it's a tough environment to play in. And again, it's just all about having that will to win, because that was the biggest issue to me in the Ohio game, is that not only did it look like they just felt like they were going to win that game, but it felt like they were just gonna, you know, walk in there and they didn't really need to try as hard as they would against an Oklahoma State or an Iowa, UNI, and just didn't really treat the road game the best way that they could.
Yeah, and that brings up like a little concern for me is they've played their best games at home, but you know, you look at that road game against Ohio, and if that same team, that same Iowa State team goes to Norman, they're going to get blown out like 70-0.
Yeah.
But if the team that played Oklahoma State shows up and carries the momentum over, they can really actually compete with one of the best teams in the Big 12 currently.
Yeah, and I think this, by no means do I believe that this is going to be where Iowa State pulls off a huge upset on the road. I would be very surprised if they did, but it's just like you said, they just need to at least show that they are willing to at least put up a fight against, like you said, one of the best teams in the Big 12 and a top 25 team in the nation currently. So, you know, if they go out to Oklahoma and they only lose by, I would say even if they lose by like 10, I'm still very impressed with Iowa State.
Oh, yeah. And I think before we get into Oklahoma, just wanted to finish a little bit. I want to highlight Eli Sanders a little more just because we talked to him today at the press conference. You know, he was dealing with injuries again over the last few games. And I think he was almost taking that. He was getting pushed below Abu Sama on the depth chart. But what he was able to do to the run game when he was in really sparked something in them where, you know, you talk about the first touchdown for any running back. You know, he also had some really big plays and impressive runs. He was able to bounce to the outside or, you know, break to the middle. And I don't know if that was maybe the offensive line was making better holes for him, or if, you know, maybe he was just figuring out what was working better than the other running backs up there.
And I agree with you there. It definitely looked like he was the more capable back against Oklahoma State. I mean, Abu Sama got 8 carries for 7 yards, so I feel like Iowa State quickly, you know, trotted away from using him a lot. And I think, well, I talked about this a lot last week, is that they need to find out what worked for them best vertically and horizontally, running wise. And I think Eli Sanders shows the best. He's the best horizontal runner, running outside or creating a hole between, you know, your guard and your tackle, whether it's right or left, whatever the case may be. And then Cartavius is really that up the middle kind of guy. You know, you push him for 4 or 5 yards, but Eli Sanders definitely kind of reminded everyone that he's the guy that is probably the most elusive on the team and is the best running back that's able to make plays. Not saying that, you know, Cartavius and Sama aren't, but just the one that, you know, has proven himself as just the best running back in the room.
Yeah, and I think we've almost been talking about Sama so much that we forget how fast Eli Sanders is. And he is like a really quick back, and he can break away for those big runs if he can get like out into space. Mm-hmm. And we also talk about Cartavius Norton getting vertical. When he went down, we saw a lot more of Carson Hansen, which I think will be good going forward because he's almost like maybe not as big as Steve O'Klotz, but he can also just fall forward for 4 yards if need be.
Right. And again, also in the receiving game too, Steve O'Klotz got some catches there again, and Eli Sanders. So, and Abu Sama, I completely forgot about this, but got a catch for 21 yards. So it looks like they don't, that the issue isn't really using them for, in the pass game, but like you said, just finding out what works best for them in the run game and which back is best for them in situations, which I think going back to what we were talking about earlier this season, having a Swiss Army knife at running back, that's almost the best thing possible because when they had guys like Breece Hall here, it was Breece all the way. Maybe Kene Nwangu came in for some reps, but really just being able to have that Swiss Army knife of a running back room, I think we're seeing that a lot these last couple games, especially against Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just talk about that Swiss Army knife, running back room. There's a lot of guys that can do a lot of things, and we also saw how good they were in the air, and we were talking about that a little bit at the press conference. Was maybe the running back room isn't doing what they need to on the ground, but they can do what they need to in the air, which is pretty much the same as running the ball. Like they're nearly identical. It's pretty much just rushing yards. Mm-hmm. So if you want to improve the running back room, it could also just start with getting the ball to the guys, just getting into their hands whatever way possible. Because if they can't find holes on the line, maybe they can just be past the line and get the ball. Because if you get the ball into any of these guys' hands, they're talented enough to just make plays and move the ball down the field.
Oh yeah, they've all proven themselves as playmakers from, Sama, Norton, Sanders. They've all proven themselves as, like you said, get the ball in their hands and they're going to be able to do something with it, which I think will help a lot against, once they start getting into teams like Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, all those TCU, those teams that, you need a lot of weapons because, if you focus on Jalen Noel or Daniel Jackson, they're gonna be able to cancel those out, and then your offense is looking like a sitting duck out there. So again, that's just really trying to help out Rocco Becht, have a lot of options, and knowing that if the run game isn't working, then you're gonna be able to pass the ball to them, and you got a playmaker, they're gonna be able to make a play.
Yeah, and you talk about just having these offensive weapons going up against these good Big 12 opponents. You look at Oklahoma, this defense is much better than it was last year. Mm-hmm. So they're going to really need all the weapons they can get and as much offensive firepower as they can get going into this Oklahoma game.
Oh, yeah. Oklahoma comes into this game undefeated, and it definitely looks like they're back on top of the Big 12. I would say they're back to their ways where they're not entirely relying on defense. They're really just relying on their offensive playmakers. I mean, they're always going to have great wide receivers. And I think the question mark has been, do they have their quarterback? They've circled through guys like, he had Spencer Rattler there for a little bit, Caleb Williams for a little bit, Tanner Mordecai was the starter there for a little bit. But now I feel like they've really found their guy in, now I'm blanking on his name. Dylan Gabriel. So that's definitely going to be a huge problem for the Iowa State defense, as they've praised all the quarterbacks so far, but I truly think that this is the best quarterback that they're going to play, or they have played so far.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, if we want to talk about Dylan Gabriel, he's proven himself so far through their first 4 games that he's definitely competing with Quinn Ewers as the best quarterback in the Big 12. I feel like it's a 1-2. Really, you can pick whoever you want there. But like I mentioned earlier, Oklahoma, it really seems like they're getting back to their ways of just relying on their quarterbacks and having great playmakers after just not really having, I guess, that guy, or trying to figure out who that guy was. And, we saw flashes of that with Gabriel last season. But this year, he's coming with a full head of steam. 12 touchdowns, just 1 pick so far.
Yeah, and you look at his stats. I mean, he's 1,200 passing yards, 12 touchdowns already within 4 games. He's on pace for crazy numbers. And, you look at some of his past games, they've won games through him. I know he had one game where he had nearly a perfect quarterback rating. It was like 98.7, I want to say.
Yeah, that was against
5 touchdowns.
Yeah, against Tulsa, 5 touchdowns, completed 90% of his passes and 421 yards. And really, it looked like they struggled. I mean, we were watching it a little bit in the press box before Iowa State's game started on Saturday. So it looked like, they struggled a little bit against Cincinnati. They ended up winning 20-6, but still, I think that's just because they didn't really rely on their run game a lot, or Cincinnati, held up Oklahoma's run game, which it'll be interesting to see how Iowa State deals with their running game, and we'll get to that later. But yeah, Gabriel still, 26 for 38, 322 yards and a touchdown against Cincinnati, I believe, on the road. So that's just, obviously if you're an Iowa State fan or just looking at this from Iowa State's perspective, this is definitely the best quarterback that they're going to face so far.
Oh, yeah. And you look at that Cincinnati game, 20-6. I think, obviously they did enough to win, but I think Cincinnati's defense also looked really good that game and kept a good lid on what this Oklahoma team can do, because this Oklahoma team is very scary. They can put up numbers with ease. But I also think, 20 points against a Cincinnati defense that probably won't be on paper as advertised as good as Iowa State's defense. So if Iowa State's defense can keep Oklahoma under 20 points, there's a good chance that, an upset could be possible. But if, Iowa State's defense plays like they did against Oklahoma State, Oklahoma's going to have a really good day.
Yeah, and
easily.
Especially how they started out. We talked about Iowa State's defense. They really kind of struggled in the run game, particularly early on. It felt like they were just getting not only just big plays, but they were finding success. Whether it wasn't, it wasn't really like 5-yard carries. It was more like 8, 9 yards, big chunk plays coming from their run game. And
then that 71-yard run.
Oh yeah, which I will give a shout out to Ben Nickel, who missed the tackle at first and then ran on the sidelines with the running back. So I'm not sure if that was
what an effort by Nickel. He knew he messed up, and the way he chased that man down to save the touchdown, he had to get up off the ground and sprint 71 yards behind a fast running back.
They still ended up scoring a touchdown on a quarterback keeper later on that drive, probably like a play or two later, but it still, again, showed a lot of heart from Ben Nickel, a guy that we talked a lot about on this podcast.
It's been great talking about Nickel this season. You talk about a walk-on that has, earned his spot, pretty much earned his spot as a starter at this point. He's very inspiring story to talk about.
Yeah, but hopefully Nickel is not going to being that guy that has to make that play. If we're relying on Ben Nickel on the defense to be the playmaker, I think
he stops at 71 yards before it happens.
Yeah, but
it's okay.
We love you, Ben.
Yeah.
But going back to that run, the Oklahoma's run game, I think I looked. They have 3. They have their feature back, Tawi Walker. I hope that's how you say it. But let's call him Walker. 34 carries, 176 yards, averaging over 5 yards per carry.
Yeah.
And then, 2 other guys in Marcus Major and Javonte Barnes that are averaging over 4 yards per carry. So it seems like, they've really figured out their quarterback, their running back. They have great receivers again. So this is definitely going to be a big problem for Iowa State's defense, where it showed that if you can get big plays on them, that's when they really start to show more of the break than they do the bend.
Yeah, this will definitely be a top 3 toughest matchup for Iowa State this year, especially looking at the offense that Oklahoma brings. Iowa State's defense is still, I want to say, top 3, if not the best in the Big 12 at this point. Maybe after last game, it might have pushed them down a little bit, but this is going to be the toughest test they've had this year because, and maybe even going forward until the Texas game at the pace that, this is going. Just because this team can put up points with ease. They can move the ball in the air. They can move the ball on the ground. it really just seems like this team can do everything. So Iowa State's defense is going to have to just be on its game on Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about Iowa State's defense, and by no means am I saying that, it's like regressed in any sorts. I think, Oklahoma State is probably just a fluke game. That's just what happened. I mean, like I said, they were used to giving up barely over 200, and they end up giving up 400. You take away the 71-yard run, you're down to 330, and then a couple pass plays that they got on them. Yeah. So I think, again, it's just that's been the story of Iowa State's defense, though, is that getting that big play. I don't really think that, is like that really kills them, but I think it definitely gets them in a scoring position. And they've done a great job, again, like I said, in the red zone, but it's all about just not giving up that big play. And Oklahoma's definitely got the best players in the Big 12 to get those big plays on them. So it'll be very interesting to see, just what happens and really if they're able to stop the run game. Because I think Iowa State does still have a great secondary overall.
Oh, yeah. And I think I was looking at the big plays during the Oklahoma State game, and they had 11 big plays, and it was varied between the two. There was, I want to say, like 5 in the air and 6 on the ground. It could be flipped, but we probably saw maybe 11 big plays the entire year up to that point. So I don't know if it was maybe the defense was playing a little bit more lax or lenient because the offense was, finding success.
Yeah.
And maybe they were just taking a back seat, like, okay, the offense is carrying us this game, we can take a breather. Or if, maybe just it was an off day for everybody. I know there was some injuries on the team. Gary Vaughn was back in, but not at 100%. We saw, I want to say Darian Porter was out.
Yes.
We had, there was a good chunk of guys that were definitely not at 100%. But I think overall they stopped a lot of big plays. I just think that maybe Oklahoma State was just, trying so many big plays that some of them had to work.
Yeah.
And maybe those 11 big plays were at like a 30% success rate.
Yeah.
But that still allowed them to put up 27 points.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, because there's definitely a lot of times where Bowman had a lot of time in the pocket to kind of, they were obviously just trying to set up those big plays. And I think really the big problem is that Iowa State's defense and this has been, I would not say the issue because, obviously Iowa State's had a great defense these past couple of years, but outside of guys like Will McDonald, there hasn't really been like, oh, that you can always rely on this guy. He's going to get a sack this game or a TFL. And Dom Orange was talking about that in his interview that I had with him today, is that they focus, what they don't get in the sacks, they make up for in the TFLs and just stopping, like holding running backs to like 1 or 2 yards per carry. So I would say that's not exactly an issue, but there are a lot of times where they get to the court, like you're watching the game and the D linemen just get there a touch late. They get the quarterback hit, but they're not getting that sack.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to deter them a lot in this game against Oklahoma, especially against, again, just a veteran guy like Dylan Gabriel, who's, probably going to have a lot of time in that pocket and set up some big plays for some big time playmakers.
Yeah. And you talk about not getting the sack. I believe they're on pace for their best season with quarterback hurries and quarterback hits, but they're, not on pace at all for sacks. Like they've gotten a very underwhelming amount of sacks for the talent that they have there, but they are doing their job at putting pressure on the quarterbacks. And I don't know if this might be one of those things that you keep applying the pressure, you keep, doing what you need to get to the quarterback. It'll just result in sacks down the line. But at this point, it's just, they're doing their best at pressuring the quarterbacks, but those quarterbacks are still getting plays off because they're not, on the ground holding the ball.
Yeah, and you saw this a lot in the Ohio game as well. They were forcing the Ohio quarterback out, but he was able to get those big runs, and I think Gabriel's obviously able to do that. So I think now more than ever, Iowa State's going to rely on their secondary and TJ Tampa, Bo Freeler, Jeremiah Cooper might make a couple big plays in this, but they're definitely going to have to rely on locking up the skies again like they did. And I said they relied a lot on that in the UNI game. They forced the O'Day to not have a very good day, as you would say it. But I think the biggest thing that Iowa State has to focus on is their secondary, which has been pretty successful overall this year.
Yeah, and even go back to last game, TJ Tampa ended the game with a pick. Freeler had a pick and almost a second one to start the game. You know, like these, and Jeremiah Cooper obviously had his 3 picks in the first 2 games. I mean, this secondary is, you know, very good, and they haven't really allowed that many big plays through the air. It's just occasionally they'll let a few slip by, and you know that just happens. But I think if they lock down like they can, like Dylan Gabriel's it's gonna be tough for him to find his receivers.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying there, because you don't really see a lot of big play. Like maybe it's from what I've seen, a lot of the big plays that like Jeremiah Cooper or TJ Tampa or Bo Freeler have given up, it's just blown coverage.
Yeah.
Or just they have a step on them. But those are only probably like 20, 25-yard plays. You're not going to see like a 50-yard touchdown.
Once a game.
Yeah, exactly. And every time that we've kind of talked to them, it's like, it's one of those like, yeah, like wish I had it back, but that's just something they focus on. I feel like they have gotten better at it every game. You talk about, you know, they had the big plays against, or Oklahoma State had a lot of big plays against them. But again, that's just kind of what I was saying. It was like blown coverage. I think it's a very talented secondary that is able to make up for the mistakes in previous games.
Yeah. And I want to say a lot of the big plays happened over very young defenders. You know, Caleb Bacon let up really big, I think it was a pass to Nixon.
Yeah.
That just got past him. You know, it was one of those that they just out-schemed Iowa State on that one. I think, you know, you look at it's a Mike Gundy team. That team is really good at scheming up plays.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where all the big plays came from. So, you know, it's not too worrying going down, you know, into the future, because not every team is going to have that creativity or variety in what they can do as Oklahoma State. But I do think that Oklahoma is a team that, you know, will bring similar, you know, issues in the, you know, the defensive schemes and be able to just break through if they need to.
And I could see this potentially being a game where, you know, you really see the mind of John Heacock and his defensive schemes, because obviously you talk about that Bacon play. 9 times out of 10, Heacock is not going to have a linebacker on a wide receiver, which that's kind of what I was scratching my head at. So, you know, that was just that 1 time out of 10 that a linebacker ends up on a wide receiver and gives up a big play. But like I said, you have talented players. I think especially in this Oklahoma game that they have great skill players. You're definitely going to want to have like I said, TJ Tampa, Jeremiah Cooper, Bo Freeler. You're going to want to have those be your guys in coverage. And then your linebackers, which the linebackers looked really solid, I would say, against Oklahoma State. You're really going to have those linebackers either remain in coverage, just kind of helping out, or, again, rushing up the middle, helping out that D-line too, which I think the linebacker core so far this year has done a great job of helping both the skies and, you know, locking up the ground as well.
Yeah, and Heacock was talking about it today a little bit. Oklahoma's very fast. And that's, I think, obviously, Heacock's a little worried. He seemed a little worried about the speed of the team and maybe the explosiveness. But I think he probably, you know, he was talked about, you know, we just have to line up. We just have to make sure that we're getting set and lined up. We can worry about Gabriel's pre-snap reads a different time. You know, what he wants to do is make sure that his team is ready for the speed that they play. And I think that's a good start, is because if you're not prepared for Oklahoma's speed and explosiveness, then you're going to get ran over.
Yeah, and it's great also, too, that going back to really what we saw from Becht is that even if the defense does give up a big plays, which I think it is inevitable, it is going to happen, that, you know, we talk about it like the defense is the only reason that Iowa State's going to win games. I think really the offense proved that they can hang. I wouldn't want to say hang with the best quite yet, but I would say that they're able to score more than 10 points a game. Yeah,
they have a good ceiling. I think we saw that. I think the one thing is they just need to be consistent at finding that ceiling. So going into this Oklahoma game, you know, a lot of things that came up was 2017. That was the last time that maybe this kind of scenario came up where Iowa State is very much the underdog going into Norman. 2017, they went up against number 3 Oklahoma, 4 touchdown underdogs. Went in there, beat them by a field goal, I want to say. And, you know, what will it take for this team to pull a similar kind of upset, I guess, this year? Because that's one thing that's been coming up a lot is, you know, it was asked all the players to Campbell, you know, how it's almost like it's been penciled in as a loss at this point. So how are they going to switch this from a loss? Because at this point, I'm not really seeing how that's going to be possible.
No, and I said it earlier in this. I don't really see a world where Iowa State goes in there and wins and pulls off the big upset.
Yeah.
But I think the best thing that the team can do is, again, get that consistency on offense. And you know what? Just, I don't want to say it like this, but do your best to prove them wrong. You know, don't, you know, obviously it's mentally going to hurt them if they go in there and they lose by 40. But if you can go in there and make it a close game, you know, you still lost. But, you know, when you go up against TCU the next weekend at home, you're just, I would say the players are confident. This is still, again, a very young team, both defensively and offensively. So if you go in and you kind of, you know, show the Big 12 what you're made of in a primetime game at night on the road, and then you can take that into the Jack Trice Legacy game against TCU at home and just kind of be like, you know, we still lost, but we showed that, you know, we can still put up a fight against the best team, one of the best teams in the Big 12 and a top 25 team in the nation.
Yeah. And I think there is a possibility that they do go in there and upset them. Obviously, it's not very likely. I think if this offense shows up like it did against Oklahoma State, and I think if the defense showed up as it did in the first 3 weeks, I think we're more looking at like probably a one possession game as opposed to Oklahoma blowing them out by, you know, 4 scores.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there is just having to play your best. It's really they're gonna need their best game from both the defense and the offense. And I think the best game so far that we've seen from the offense is obviously against Oklahoma State. And I think the defense had solid games against really everyone except Oklahoma State. So if they can come back, have the bounce back game on defense, and then carry over offensively for Iowa State, I think, yeah, they can put up a good fight. But really for me, I would probably say confidence-wise for me, probably like 15 to 10% that Iowa State pulls off the upset.
Yeah. I mean, right now isn't...
Matchup predictor for ESPN has it
90, almost 95% Oklahoma.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a little disrespectful, but it's...
maybe that was before the Oklahoma State game.
Yeah, and I don't think... the early line is 20 for OU. 20, so,
so
Iowa State's not...
touchdowns.
Essentially 3 touchdowns. So, you know, under 48.5 for
nearly
all
the same as 2017, which we looked up. It was 1 touchdown difference, 38-31 Iowa State.
Yeah.
So it has happened before.
And that was when, actually looking here that David Montgomery, 17 carries for 55 yards. I feel like that's a very Cartavius Norton stat line right there. Obviously, Montgomery with that touchdown, but, you know, Kyle Kempt.
Yeah, it was the Kempt game for sure.
Coming into Norman for 3 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield's Heisman year. But anyway.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm excited for this game, just knowing that obviously there is a possibility that, yes, Iowa State comes with the upset. But really, I'm just looking to see if they can just find that consistency from the offense and bounce back on defense.
Yeah, it'll be good to just see if they can get rolling through the Big 12 because they don't necessarily need a win here. What they need is to just show that they can win later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is definitely, looking at Iowa State's schedule, going to be their toughest matchup for at least a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Especially from what we've seen from the Big 12. So, after Oklahoma, you're back at home for TCU, and then you're on the road at Cincinnati, which we'll be at. And then you're on the road again against Baylor. Cincinnati's kind of a question mark, I think, based on how, we talked about earlier, Oklahoma played Cincinnati, and that was a very close game. I think Cincinnati probably has a good defense, but again, I'm not here to predict games here for Iowa State coming up, But I'm just saying, in general, I mean, the toughest matchup for Iowa State after this game probably isn't till a month later against Kansas.
Yeah.
Probably their toughest matchup.
But that is homecoming weekend in Ames, so it could really go either way there.
So then,
I think, honestly, a lot of the games, what the Oklahoma State game showed me is that a lot of these games are winnable, honestly. It's just there's probably a good chunk of like 3 to 4 in there that are going to be pretty tough to win, if not unwinnable. So, and I think if they drop all those, then they're probably not looking at a bowl game.
Yeah.
But there is still a chance at them getting a bowl game out of this season.
Yeah, I agree. The Oklahoma State game definitely gives you confidence, at least for the offense, and I'm pretty confident that the defense is going to have a bounce back game against Oklahoma for sure. And if it's not against Oklahoma and Oklahoma just sticks with their dominant ways offensively, then the bounce back game comes against TCU.
Yeah. So, my score prediction, I'm going to sit here. I'll probably predict Oklahoma. I'm not going to be that guy that's going to say that it's going to be a fairy tale game. I'll say Oklahoma 35, Iowa State 24.
Okay.
I think the offense continues to move a good amount, and I think the defense does their best, but I think Oklahoma's firepower is just too much.
I'll agree with you on that. I think Oklahoma's going to win this, but I'll say that it gets to 30, Oklahoma 30, Iowa State 20. Defense is going to give up probably at least 3 touchdowns, I want to say. But then Iowa State makes it. Maybe this is one of those games where Iowa State does get beat pretty badly, but they get some like late touchdowns or late scores to make up for it and make it seem not as bad, which again, for me, you're looking at it as it can be consistent later on. But really, any Iowa State player should know that you just got to go in there and, know that you are the underdog and just do whatever you can to prove that you're an Iowa State team that can stay on the map despite, struggling earlier in the season.
Yeah. I mean, their backs are against the wall, so really they have nothing to lose. It's their season to just decide what they want to do. So if they really just have to go out there and show that they can compete. So thanks to everybody for watching. We'll be back next week as we talk about what went down in Norman and previewing the upcoming Big 12 schedule after that.